They say love heals. I believed that until I gave every piece of my heart to a man with everything except peace. I brought him back from the edge, poured light into his shadows, and in return, he shattered me with the same hands I held when no one else dared. If you've ever loved someone who didn't know how to love you back, stay with me. This is more than a story about a man with money. It's about a woman with a heart, my heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because someone out there needs this truth too. Before I met him, my life was quiet in a way I never expected. I wasn't searching for anything, not love, not drama, not another story to tell. I was just trying to find myself again. After walking away from heartbreaks that left me raw and learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, I built a little world around me where I felt safe. I was independent. I paid my own bills, chased my own dreams, and believed that I was enough, just as I was. There was a kind of peace in that space, a calm I needed to heal the pieces that had been broken before. I spent my days focused on work, my evenings with close friends or alone, lost in books or music that filled the silence. I wasn't lonely, but I wasn't eager for someone to fill any gaps either. I wanted to be whole on my own terms. I carried my history with me, scars and all, and that history made me cautious. I wasn't the type to rush into anything or let someone else define my happiness. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, when I thought I was perfectly content with my quiet world, he appeared. Not in a flashy way, not in some grand entrance. No, it was subtle, like a shadow crossing my path, something I didn't notice at first but would change everything. I wasn't looking for love, but love was about to find me. And it wasn't the kind I had imagined. I still remember the moment I first saw him. It wasn't anything dramatic or cinematic like you'd expect in a movie. It was quiet, almost accidental. We were both at this little downtown gallery opening, nothing fancy, just a crowd of people who appreciated art and a good glass of wine. He was standing across the room, alone, scanning the room with those eyes that looked like they carried 1,000 stories. You could see the weight behind that glance. Not the kind of confidence that comes with money or power, but a deep, tired kind of sadness. Something about him caught my attention, not because of his status or wealth, but because he seemed like a man who had been through a storm and was barely holding on. I wasn't looking for a story to get involved in, but my heart recognized a familiar kind of pain, and I found myself drawn to it. I didn't approach him right away. I watched from a distance, curious about the man who looked so out of place in a room full of people who wanted to impress. Eventually, our paths crossed by chance near the refreshments table. He smiled, a small, almost shy smile, and I returned it. We exchanged a few words, nothing profound, but something about the way he listened made me want to know more. He wasn't the usual man chasing after me with grand gestures or smooth talk. No, he was quiet, almost fragile in his presence. And I realized then, maybe for the first time, that sometimes the most broken souls are the ones who need the most love. After that first meeting, it was like fate kept nudging us together. We kept running into each other, in places I wouldn't expect, at times that felt too coincidental to ignore. At first, our conversations were brief, almost casual, but there was something different about him. He didn't rush to impress or charm me. Instead, he listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole being. And for someone who was used to being in control of everything, that caught me off guard. We started talking more, really talking, not about the usual small stuff, but the things people usually hide, the kind of things that make you vulnerable. He spoke about the shadows in his past, the parts of himself that he kept locked away, even from the world that adored his success. He was honest in a way that made me want to be honest too. I found myself sharing pieces of my story, the hurts, the lessons, the quiet victories I celebrated alone. It felt strange and beautiful at the same time. Two broken people trying to figure out if we could hold on to each other without falling apart. I didn't expect to care as much as I did, but there was something about the way he looked at me, like I wasn't just another person to pass through his life. I could see his cracks, and somehow he saw my strength. It was a fragile connection, but it felt real, and that was rare for me. In that space, something began to grow. Not love, not yet, but the first hint that maybe, just maybe, we could be something more. Our connection didn't rush. It wasn't fireworks or instant sparks. It was quiet, like a slow-burning flame that grew warmer with every conversation, every late-night call, every moment spent just being present with each other. He wasn't the kind of man who wore his emotions on his sleeve. In fact, it took time for him to open up at all. But when he did, it felt like I was being trusted with something sacred. He told me about his childhood, about the loneliness behind the wealth, the betrayals he couldn't forget, and the heavy weight of expectations he carried like armor. I listened, not to fix him, but to hold space for his pain. And in return, I started nurturing him in little ways. I cooked meals when he forgot to eat, sent him books that helped him find calm, reminded him to breathe when his mind raced too fast. It wasn't about saving him, it was about showing up, day after day, as a steady presence. We traveled to places neither of us had been before, laughed until our stomachs hurt, and shared quiet mornings filled with soft conversations. Those moments felt like pieces of normalcy in a world that often felt chaotic. But even in those beautiful times, I gave more than I got. I poured my heart out, hoping that one day he'd fill the spaces I couldn't on my own. I was falling for him, slowly, deeply, but I was also starting to notice the cracks beneath the surface. The way he sometimes pulled away when I reached too close, the way his apologies came with gifts but didn't change the patterns. Still, I held on, believing love could heal what hurt inside him. Love isn't always what it seems when you're inside of it. At first, I convinced myself that the moments of doubt and fear were just part of his struggle, part of the brokenness I was trying to help mend. But the red flags started showing up, small and sharp, like cracks in the foundation I was building my hope on. He began to get possessive, the way he questioned where I was, who I was with. It wasn't jealousy born from love, it felt more like control trying to sneak in. And then there were the times he would disappear without warning, leaving me wondering if I'd done something wrong, only to return with apologies and gifts that felt like attempts to silence the hurt he caused. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that his past made him act out, that love meant patience. My friends noticed the changes in me before I did. They asked questions I didn't want to answer and gave warnings I didn't want to hear. But I stayed loyal, believing my love was the thing that could pull him back from the edge. I thought if I just loved harder, if I just stayed longer, he would finally be able to handle all of me, the good, the broken, and the whole. But deep down, I started feeling the weight, the exhaustion of carrying us both, the pain of being the one who had to hold everything together while he slipped further into his darkness. I wanted to believe in us, but I was beginning to see that sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken inside. There comes a moment in some relationships when the truth can no longer be ignored. For me, that moment hit hard and fast. I found messages, hidden, secret conversations that shattered the fragile trust I had been holding on to. It wasn't just about what he was saying, but what it meant. He wasn't ready for the kind of love I was giving him. When I confronted him, he broke down. The man who had seemed so strong, so in control, suddenly looked lost and afraid. He said he was scared of losing me, scared of being vulnerable in a way he never had before. But fear didn't excuse the pain he kept causing. I realized then that he loved me only as long as I fit into the broken pieces he was willing to accept. My whole heart, my true, full self, was too much for him to handle. His mistakes weren't just slips, they were patterns. Patterns that showed he wasn't ready to change or grow in the ways I needed. And in that realization, something inside me shifted. I understood that loving him back to life meant loving him in his brokenness, but it didn't mean I had to lose myself in the process. I wanted to save him, but I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. My healing, my worth, my boundaries, they mattered just as much as his pain. Holding on to him any longer meant sacrificing pieces of myself I wasn't willing to give up. It was heartbreaking to accept, but necessary. That breaking point wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I chose to love myself enough to walk away. Leaving him wasn't easy. It never is when you've poured so much of yourself into someone else's brokenness. But I knew I had reached the line where love stopped being enough and where I had to choose myself. I didn't walk away angry or bitter. I walked away with quiet strength, with the kind of power that comes from finally realizing your own worth. He begged me to stay, promised he'd change, that he'd be different. But I saw the same old patterns lurking beneath his words, patterns I had tried to ignore for too long. Offers of fancy gifts and grand apologies couldn't replace the respect and honesty I deserved. I told him, gently but firmly, that I loved him enough to let him go, that I couldn't keep losing pieces of myself to hold him together. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but also the most freeing. Walking away didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I chose to care for myself first. I wanted peace more than pain, healing more than heartache. I needed to stop being the one who fixed everything and start being the one who felt whole. That moment wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about reclaiming my life and my heart. I learned that sometimes loving someone means knowing when to say goodbye, because you can't pour from an empty cup, and you deserve someone who can handle all of you, not just the parts they want to keep. Leaving him was the beginning of my true healing, the moment I chose me. After walking away, I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the pain I was leaving behind. I started going to therapy, something I'd put off for years, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand myself in ways I never had before. It wasn't easy. Some days felt heavier than others, but I kept showing up for myself. I found a new job that challenged me, but also made me feel alive again. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, friends who reminded me of my worth when I forgot. Most importantly, I learned to pour love back into my own heart, the kind of love that doesn't depend on anyone else to survive. It was messy, imperfect, but real. I started speaking my truth, writing about my experience, and sharing my story with others who might feel trapped in their own broken love. Helping others heal helped me heal too. I realized my pain wasn't just a wound to hide, but a source of strength and purpose. There was a freedom in reclaiming my life that I hadn't felt before. I was no longer defined by the man I loved or the brokenness I tried to fix. I was defined by the woman who had learned to love herself fiercely, who refused to settle for less than she deserved. That journey taught me that healing is a choice, one we have to make over and over again. And every time I chose me, I grew stronger. I became whole. Years passed, and life moved on. One day, completely by chance, I saw him again. He was standing across the room like a shadow from my past, still carrying that weight, still alone in a way that felt familiar but distant. The man who once held so much power seemed smaller now, quieter. He looked at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. His eyes softened, and he said my name like a prayer, like something sacred he couldn't quite reach anymore. But I didn't hesitate. I smiled, warm but firm. The girl who had loved him back to life was not the same woman anymore. That moment was about closure, not a new beginning. I felt peace knowing I didn't need to fix him or save him again. I had given him my whole heart once, and now I had enough love left for myself to walk away with grace. I wished him well, truly, but I knew the chapter was closed. As I turned to leave, I realized how far I'd come, from a place of broken love to one of self-respect and strength. That encounter wasn't about reigniting what was lost. It was about honoring the journey that led me to freedom. I walked away knowing that love, at its best, lifts you up. It never weighs you down. And sometimes the greatest love story you can live is the one where you learn to love yourself first. Looking back, I see now that loving him was never about fixing a broken billionaire. It was about learning how to love myself in the process. I gave so much of my heart, hoping it would heal his pain, but what I really needed was to protect my own. That love taught me boundaries, how to say no, how to walk away when something doesn't feel right, and how to recognize my worth even when I felt invisible. I learned that love isn't supposed to feel like a sacrifice of who you are. It's not about losing yourself in someone else's darkness. True love is about two whole people choosing each other, not one person carrying the other. My heart was whole, but he couldn't handle it, and that's okay. Sometimes people aren't ready for the kind of love they deserve. Now I understand that my story isn't just mine. It's the story of so many who've loved someone who couldn't love them back the way they needed. It's a reminder that your heart is precious and deserves to be held gently, with care and respect. You don't have to be the one to fix anyone else's brokenness. Most importantly, I've learned that healing is a journey. It takes time, patience, and sometimes a willingness to walk away from what feels familiar. But when you do, you find a kind of peace that no one else can give you. You find yourself. If my story resonates with you, I hope it reminds you to love yourself fiercely and to never settle for less than you deserve. Your heart is whole, and it's worth protecting. If you've ever confused pain for passion or love for rescue, let this story remind you. You are not here to fix anyone. You are here to be loved in full. Hit subscribe, leave a comment if this touched your soul, and never forget, your heart deserves peace, not repair.